and the violence down in South Africa. And if you look at who's propping up the terribly murderous and racist African National Congress, which is the ruling party down there, you see China and Soros both stick out like a sore thumb. And part of the reason is, military strategy. Part of the reason is trade. Part of it's agriculture. Part of it's just genuine power. But it's a complex interplay of several different factors, even beyond what I just named. But the reason for moving in on certain places is variable. It changes based on the strategic geographical location and the resources. And that's why we can look at South Africa with their droughts and now this snowstorm in Cape Town. And we can assume that the Chinese aren't trying to move in there with their financial investments and trade merely in the hopes of obtaining agricultural land. But then you look at their push on Venezuela, which is actually in the midst of a dangerous trial right now in which the government's trying to shut down media outlets critical of them, which isn't shocking, but it'll likely pass through, setting a precedent for the entire country. I mean, that's so incredibly dangerous, but it's also not worth pretending like that hasn't already happened. But yeah, so we look at Venezuela, and they'll be far less affected by the solar cycle that we're entering and the grand solar minimum and all of that compared to South Africa. And then you find out that there's a lot of land in Venezuela that's arable but isn't being utilized. So the famines and the bread lines are fabricated issues because the government controls it. If Venezuela was a free market, do you really think that this land would just be left unused? I don't think so. Either Venezuelans would use it, or for the right trade, someone else would use it. But anyways, the point that I'm trying to make is that when you're considering all of the factors that play into the actions and decisions of a country, in this specific case, China, you have to treat it as a symphonic dance. Okay, who's leading and how much they're leading is all part of the dance. So when you look at South Africa, there's reasons that the Chinese are moving in there, but those reasons are not necessarily the same as in Venezuela, and it's certainly not the same relatively speaking. I mean, it's easy to look at Venezuela and say, oh yeah, lots of great arable land down there. That must be the primary drive of the Chinese, but now I'm not so sure that that's the case. China's military reforms have been revealed by leaked internal documents which indicate Beijing intends to expand its military might offshore so that the country will be allowed to manage a crisis, contain a conflict, win a war, and overtake the U.S. in military strength. They don't specifically mention Venezuela, that was something that I brought up, but Venezuela is a heck of a lot closer to the U.S. than China's mainland, and they're also closer than those man-made islands in the South China Sea. Not to mention, Trump announced a 25% tariff on $50 billion worth of Chinese goods effective as of this morning. So China is gearing up for overtaking the U.S., and this was certainly something longer in the process than just being the product of a trade war. I mean, the Chinese Communist Party is moving into Australia and really any vulnerable part of the world where they can take an advantage. So when Trump implements these tariffs, you have to wonder how much is because he sees the moves that the Chinese are making to strategically get their military closer to the U.S. As we open up and expand our national interests beyond borders, we desperately need a comprehensive protection of our own security around the globe. So as they move their imperialistic communist army around the globe, they need a way to protect themselves in this pillaging of individual sovereignty and the funding of actual pillaging. And further down in the leaked document, they actually talk about realizing the goals set forward by the party and Chairman Xi. Saying that you want to realize the goals of the party means that you want to bring your ideological worldview into fruition. And we see that they're set to get it through any means necessary. The report said a strong military is the best way to escape the obsession that war is unavoidable between an emerging power and a ruling hegemony. Yeah, and they're right, but keep your strong military at home or at certain places that further secure free trade for the rest of the world, as the US has done. But nope, that's not what China's doing. And I'm not trying to discount the cases of US imperialism. I get it, okay? Not everything that any country does is all good. But it was worth calling out the US on unwarranted military intervention. And it's worth calling out China on this leaked memo and their fundamental and likely purposeful misunderstanding of how a strong army can escape the threat of war from a ruling hegemony. I mean, beyond this, China's building up their military technology, which is perfectly fine. It's just concerning because they're not staying in their own yard. They're actively talking about overtaking the US military's strength. And if it was a peaceful country or a civil country, then whatever. Monitor it, but take a look in the mirror. Unfortunately, this is a communist army. This is not a nation looking to be peaceful. There's a reason that China is non-violently taking over Australia and several parts of Africa and South America. And now they're trying to overtake the US and Russia's military power. Forgive me for being skeptical, but if China is making the pushes that they are in non-violent ways simply because they can't enforce much of it with their current military, what'll happen when they can enforce the Communist Party's growth through military action? Just think about that, because this is definitely a story that's going to keep developing, and there's so many different aspects to it that there's going to be something out like every single day on this. So that's all for this video. I'll link as much as I can about all of this in the description below, but it's just another thing, like I was saying, for us to really keep an eye on with China. And I'm sure that Trump has his finger on the pulse of all of this. So thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to leave a like, subscribe if you haven't. If you want to support the kind of journalism that I do, donation and Patreon links are below. I appreciate all the support.